I recently bought this book. I was already familiar for quite some time about what's contained in it. The book is called Make Your Bed. Little things that can change your life and maybe the world. And it was written by Admiral William H. McRaven. Let me read the inside of the dust jacket, the first part of it to you. It'll tell you what the book is about. On May 17, 2014, Admiral William H. McRaven addressed the graduating class of the University of Texas at Austin on their commencement day. Taking inspiration from the university's slogan, "What starts here changes the world," he shared the 10 principles he learned during Navy SEAL training that helped him overcome challenges, not only in his training and long naval career, but also throughout his life. And he explained how anyone can use these basic lessons to change themselves and the world for the better. Admiral McRaven's original speech went viral with more than 10 million views. Yeah, how many of you are familiar with this, either the speech or the book? Well, I highly recommend both. The book is basically the same things contained in the speech, just elaborated on, gone into more detail. Some more incidents, some more explanation. The speech itself is like 17 minutes long or something like that, so it's not terribly long. You can find a shortened version of it as well on YouTube, but I recommend you get the whole one. 37 years that he was a Navy SEAL, Admiral McRaven. And by the time he finished, he was the commander of all U.S. Special Operation Forces. All U.S. Special Operation Forces. And in that speech and in this book, as I just read to you, he describes 10 lessons that he learned from that training as a Navy SEAL that apply to everyone in life in some way or another. Each lesson is very beneficial. Each one contains and is based on very sound biblical principle. And you could take any one of those lessons and I could do a teaching on that lesson. An entire teaching on just that lesson that's shared from the Bible. And I'm sure at some point I will teach many of those principles referring back to the book. Those principles are all principles that I've taught at other times in different ways anyway. But I'm not going to get into the specifics of the book today, for the most part. I'm not going to teach any of those 10 points or lessons, but rather why I share the book and this with you is because what I do want to talk about and share with you is the underlying concept of disciplined training and what it does. Navy SEAL training is known far and wide to be the most rigorous, demanding, and difficult training that anybody can ever subject themselves to. The people that undergo it, the people that are involved in it, go with very limited sleep. They're trained in icy cold water, under extreme physical exercise, and combat conditions. I personally have known a few that have undergone it, and when they describe it, they talk about how much it did for them, and they also describe it as just sheer hell. The Navy, on their website for the SEALs, describes it as brutal, preparing you for the extreme physical and mental challenges of SEAL missions. The training takes 2.5 years to complete. 2.5 years to complete. And out of the approximately 1,000 to 1,500 sailors that enter the training each year, only 200 to 250 complete it. And that's the goal. The goal is to whittle it down to only the best. Those that are able to handle the extreme conditions that they are being trained for, because the Navy SEALs are the ones that handle the most dangerous, critical, and difficult missions that the military ever takes on. That's not other branches of the service too. Everybody's kind of got their equivalent. The Navy SEALs lately, or in the past decade or so, have really taken the forefront. Once upon a time, it was the Green Berets. They were described as the crack troops. And before that, the Rangers, they started all this stuff with the Army. I don't know what the Air Force, I'm sure they've got one. Do you know? You don't know.
Yeah,
So, I don't know what they're named. They all have these special operations forces. The Marine Corps, for just the Marine Corps, because that was always considered a kind of a rigorous branch of service in itself, their slogan was "The few, the proud." And it emphasizes that not many are able to do what they do. The few, the proud. And not many people will ever undergo the Marine Corps training or the Naval SEAL training or any of those kind of things, but everybody is involved in some kind of training in their life. Everyone is involved in some kind of training, all of us are. Whether you're in the military or a first responder or a doctor, a nurse, a tradesman, an engineer, a musician, any kind of skill in life, people need to be trained for. But it doesn't stop there. It's not just in the occupations or careers that people undergo or take on. It's in every area of life. And one of the most essential areas of training is that a child receives from their parent, and we'll be getting into that. But most importantly, the most important training that anyone can take on, really, even greater than that which defends country, is training for Christian service. And that's what we're going to be looking at in God's Word. You have been called to serve. You've been called. Did you know that?
Yes.
It is selective service, but nobody's forced to do it. Selective service is what they call the draft when we had it, right? Look at Matthew 22. You've been called, but you don't have to serve. And in Matthew 22, in verse 14, it says, "For many are called, but few are chosen." Many are called, but few are chosen. Just the few, just the proud. But not the wrong kind of pride. You know, there's a whole chapter in 1 Corinthians that talk about that. Not the mighty, not the wise. That God has chosen what many times the world regard as just nobody. Just not important. Not any mighty, not any wise, not any great. The God has chosen the foolish things to confound the wise, it says. And that's why He chose me. Because, thankfully, although I was wise at the time I heard, wise like in the worldly sense, once I realized, and it didn't take, all it took was somebody pulling out their Bible and opening it up in front of me and filled with all the notes and the underlining and the highlighting, and I quickly realized I didn't know anything, which got me to listen. Because we have to be. We have to be willing to be trained. We have to be willing to train. So turn to Hebrews chapter 12, where we're going to begin to look at how we are trained in Christian service. How we are trained. In Hebrews 12, this is the starting point for our learning about training for Christian service. In Hebrews 12, verse 5 we'll jump to. And ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he does what? Chasteneth. And scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons. Now, that's not said to insult somebody, okay? That simply shows somebody that was a bastard was someone that was not claimed by the Father in that culture. And because they were not claimed by the Father, then they didn't receive that instruction of the Father. That's the only point that's being made there. You get it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Our earthly fathers we showed respect to. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? If we were willing to be subject to our earthly fathers, how much more should we be subject to our heavenly Father? For they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. That father, that earthly father, they corrected you, but some of what they did really was just for their own pleasure. You're too noisy, go to bed, get out of here. They corrected you. It was for their own pleasure sometimes. But that's never the case with God. God doesn't tell you anything because it makes his life easier. He's God, he's fine, he's good. He doesn't need anything. It's for your benefit. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. It's a great passage. It's a great passage. If I've got enough time, we'll go back into it in a little more detail. But the first thing I want you to recognize from it is that God is the one who is behind our Christian training if it's going to be legitimate Christian training for legitimate Christian service. But what does that mean? What does that mean when it says God chastens us? Or even sometimes people they recognize what that word chasten means, and they still describe what's behind that in a way that is so erroneous, so wrong, that it's not at all what it means. They'll say God's disciplining me, God's training me, God's working with me, and they'll say that in the context of terrible things that have just happened to them. This passage is saying that God does train us, but we have to understand how he trains us. Does he do it by zapping us with lightning bolts from heaven? No. That was kind of the picture I had when I was growing up. You better watch it, because if you get out of line, man, God's going to whack you good. He's going to whop you over the head with a 2x4. He's going to send a lightning bolt at you. He's going to do something to your life to correct you, to whack you hard. And the way that people talk, and here you can have, let's say, this wonderful Christian man. And he is such a wonderful believer, and he's just blessed. And he's prospering. And it seems like everything's going so well for him. And then one day, lo and behold, his business fails. People that work for him cheat him out of stuff. Somebody somehow robs him of everything he has. And then no sooner does that happen, than the next thing that happens is his house burns down. Burns to the ground. And then calamity occurs with his family. A tornado comes and it blows down the house of his children and they all die. Terrible things happen to people. And then finally, this wonderful believer gets terribly sick. And some other wonderful Christian comes along and tells him, well, this is all happening because God's trying to teach you something. God's chasing you. God's disciplining you. Does this fellow remind you of anybody?
Yes. Job.
Job. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff that happened to Job, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's the same kind of stuff that Job's friends, those miserable comforters God called them, came along and told him, isn't it?
Yes.
It sure is. It sure is. Read the record. They come along and say, well, Job, God's trying to teach you something here. You got to get meek. This stuff wouldn't be happening to you, Job, if you hadn't been doing something wrong. You must be out of fellowship somewhere. You must be out of line somewhere. Because if a person's walking with God, this kind of stuff doesn't happen. That's what they said, isn't it?
Yes.
If you don't know, read the record. Read the study called Studies in Human Suffering. The name of it was changed. What's it called now? Job from Victim to Victor in Volume 4 of Studies in Abundant Living. Great, great study. It's the same way, though. It's the same nonsense that people are saying when they talk about God chastening you, God training you, God teaching you something. God does not do that kind of thing to you. We'll see that more. The word chasten in Hebrews, back in Hebrews 12 we're in Hebrews 12, the words chasten, chasteneth, chastening, chastisement, all come from the Greek word in the verb form, paiduo, and in the noun form, paideia. So you have the noun and the verb form of those, and that's what's used throughout all of those places where it's used in that chapter, where it talks about God chastening, God chastising. That word means the whole training and education of children, which relates to the cultivation of minds and morals, and employs for this purpose now commands and admonitions, now reproof and punishments. It also includes the training and care of the body. Whatever in adults, it also cultivates the soul, especially by correcting mistakes and curbing passions. That's according to Thayer's Greek lexicon. That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you get all that?
No.
You don't have to get all this phraseology. They all are valuable, and sometimes if you want to study it more, it's a good one to look at. But understand what it is it's the training. It's the whole training. And you'll understand this word more as we see how it's used and how it's translated and used in the Word of God. You can go to Titus chapter 2, and that's the first one we'll look at together, but I'll just quickly, while you're turning there, mention a couple of other places where it's used. In Acts 7:22, it says, and Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. It goes on. He was learned. That's the verb form of that word paidua. And how was he learned? He was taught. He was instructed. In Acts 22, verse 3, Paul's saying, I'm verily a man, a Jew born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught, there's that word again, the verb form, according to the perfect manner of the fathers. Paul was taught in all the manner of the law. He was a Pharisee. He received all the instruction, just like the equivalent in our day of going to law school. When somebody goes to law school, do they burn down their house and do they steal their goods?
No.
Yeah, some might say, but the high cost of an education, but as far as stealing their goods. But it's learning. That's the point of it. It's instruction. It's instruction. In Titus chapter 2, in verse 11, For the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching, there's that word again, the same word that's translated chastening, the same word that's translated chastising. It's teaching here, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. I'd like to read to you the ESV translation of that verse because it adds something even more to our understanding of this word, paidua. Training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions. Training. Teaching is that word here translated training. And to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age, looking for that blessed hope, and it goes on. It's training us to renounce ungodliness, training us to live for God, to move on from those former ways, from that former life, and to be trained to be godly men and women that live in light of that wonderful hope of Christ's return. Turn to 2 Timothy chapter 3. What I just read was the verb form. 2 Timothy 3:16 has the noun form, and this is one of the key scriptures. I would say the key scripture in understanding just what this word chasten means. Just what this word paidua or paidua means. 2 Timothy 3:16. All scripture is given by inspiration of God, God-breathed, and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction. There's our word. For instruction in righteousness. All scripture is profitable in one of three ways: doctrine, reproof, or correction. And all scripture, all doctrine, reproof, and correction are involved in that instruction, that training in right living, in righteousness. That's what that word means. It is that word of God. This is how God trains us. He doesn't make you lose your job. He doesn't have your girlfriend leave you. He doesn't, whatever all the other stuff people want to say. None of that's it. This is how God trains us. This is how He instructs us with His Word. His Word, which all of it is instruction, is training in right living. Doctrine, reproof, correction. Doctrine's Him giving you the teaching in the first place. But training is more than teaching. Training is more than teaching. Training requires also watching over that person, and when they begin to do something wrong, point out that they're doing it wrong. If you got a coach that's training you how to bat a baseball, how to hit a ball, and there you are, and you go to hit it, and that coach says, yeah, keep your elbow up, keep your elbow up. He's already told you that, but now he watches and he gives you that reproof, that practical correction. In all of life, when we're trained, if we're trained right, there's going to be doctrine, reproof, and correction if it's needed. Turn to Romans chapter 10. All scripture is doctrine, reproof, and correction, and that's how God trains us. But this brings us to this other important point. In Romans 10, verse 14, it says, how then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And down in verse 17, so then faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. We need not only God, but others involved in that training. We can't receive that doctrine unless somebody teaches us that doctrine. How can we hear unless somebody shares it? We can't receive that reproof unless we've learned it, and that requires a teacher. And same with the correction. We need others that are involved in that training. And that training, though, the involvement of other people in that training for Christian service, again, has to be done teaching us, training us in the Word, and with sound principle from God's Word. It's not, no matter what the relationship is, a parent, a leader in the church, if they're not doing it with the Word of God, then it doesn't matter who they are, it's not from God. Ultimately, it all goes back to God. It all goes back to God. Whether that training comes directly from us learning, reading the Bible, or somebody teaching it to us, and we needed that in the first place, or a parent raising a child. And that's where we'll go next, Ephesians chapter 6. If the instruction is not done according to God's method, God's Word, His precepts, then it will not produce the right results. In fact, it can produce the opposite results. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4 says, "And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath." Now, the way a parent provokes his child to wrath is by not doing things according to God's Word, not raising him that way. Just because a child is angry, full of wrath, doesn't necessarily mean that it was the parent that provoked him. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, so you can't use that as the metric. Well, I told my child not to do that, and they got mad at me, so I must have done something wrong. Well, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. How'd you do it? Did you do it with love? Did you do it according to God's way? If you did, then how they reacted isn't the metric. It's not the measuring stick. But if we're not doing things according to God's Word, then we are provoking them to wrath. And it's like the physician's oath. First, do no harm when it comes to parenting. When it comes to any training that we're involved, not just as parents with children, but leaders with followers in the church, other things that you might be doing if it's a Christian employer with a Christian worker, it has to be that we don't do harm. We don't do harm, we do things according to God's Word. But instead, the latter part of that verse, bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That word nurture in that verse is the same word that we've been looking at in all these other places. It's that same word that we just saw in 2 Timothy 3:16, instruction, as in instruction in righteousness. It's the same word that we saw back in Hebrews 12 with God chastening, our Heavenly Father instructing or chastening. It's the same word, nurture. Go back and read Hebrews 12 and put nurture in all those places. Takes on a very different feel, doesn't it? Yep. Yeah. Sure does. But it's the same Greek word. It's the same Greek word. And it is that patient instruction, that patient training. A parent nurtures their child, and to do that, it requires doctrine, reproof, and correction. It requires not just teaching them the Word, but teaching them that behavior which is right according to God's Word. And then when they don't, reproving them. And sometimes you may need to go in and actually correct them, because lo and behold, they get to be school age, and now they're taught that what's right is wrong, what's wrong is right. And now you got to go in and do some actual doctrinal correction, because now they've got The world's messed this up for so long that they think darkness is light and light is darkness. Well, we'll look at all of this stuff some more, but first we'll take a quick break. Talking about parents training their children, and that word nurture is that same word that's translated chasten in all of its different forms in Hebrews 12, and instruction in 2 Timothy chapter 3. It makes you stop and think about what a parent does and how they do train their children. They certainly don't do it the way that some Christians say God trains his children, do they? No. You know, if any parent did any of the things that they talk about God doing to train, to discipline, to teach, to work with his kids, why, they'd take away the children and they'd lock the parent up in jail.
Yep.
Well, you broke your leg because God's trying to teach you something. Had to teach my kid something. He was really being stubborn, so I broke his leg. Now he'll learn the lesson. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
God's a loving father. What loving father would do the things that people talk about God doing along these lines? Training. Training is that instruction, that patient instruction, and it takes time. It takes time. Every parent discovers this. One day, they're working with that 2-year-old, and they teach them something. They train them something. But there they are at 16, and they're still working on trying to get this across to this kid. It takes patience. It takes time. Training is not the same as teaching. Teaching takes very little time. Noah is 16 years old. He wasn't the one I was talking about. He's 16 years old, and soon he will be driving. Now, I could teach Noah how to drive in a real short time. You go out there to the car, you take the keys, you get in the car, you put the keys in the ignition, you step on the brake, you either turn that key or you push the button. You put the car in gear, you back up, you put it in forward, you drive out the driveway. When you come to some place you want to stop, you step on the other pedal. When you're done, put it in park. I just taught him how to drive. Who wants to let him have his car now? Because there's a lot more to learning and training in driver's training than just teaching the mechanics of driving, isn't there?
Yeah.
It takes time to master that, and it takes patient instruction. It takes, and to train somebody to drive takes a lot of patient instruction. But that's how it is when it comes to every category of training. If you're going to train somebody, you have to go over those lessons until they've been mastered. Until they've been mastered. 2.5 years for that Navy SEAL training to happen. 2.5 years. Because it takes them being exposed to every situation that they're going to potentially be exposed to in real life situations. It's hard. It is brutal. It's brutal. But it prepares them to handle the most difficult, dangerous, and challenging positions. Admiral McRaven was the person who was responsible for the hunting down and executing Osama bin Laden. Yeah. So, it starts off with making your bed. But it prepares you to take on the biggest challenges. You know, I had the privilege of being part of a training program, a Christian training program called the Way Corps. And that program by Dr. Earl, who is the one that designed the program, was designed, in his words, to be the spiritual Green Berets back in that day. The God's crack troops. People that were able to handle the toughest spiritual situations that they could be found in. And so that training was challenging. It was difficult. You know, there was the exposure to a lot of demanding draining physical, mental, and spiritual challenges built into that training, into those learning situations, so that we could handle situations and not faint, not quit. Not the first time life got a little bit difficult, turn tail and run. God needs people that are willing to train hard to be able to handle the greatest challenging situations. That child, as they grow, their circle of influence expands. And now other people are involved in the training. Some for better, some for worse. Some people are going to have a role in training that child and teaching them and doing things with them. Teachers, employers. Some of what they receive may be great, some of it not so great. And it requires, again, that parent to do such a great job in building in that child that Word of God so that they then begin to discern, to be able to understand and recognize what training they should follow and what they should not. And again, it takes patience. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, moving into the category of the spiritual and spiritual leaders, in 2 Timothy chapter 2, in verse 24, it says, "And the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men, apt to teach, patient." You see the qualities that it takes to be able to train somebody? Apt to teach, able to teach, patience, because people don't learn in a day. It takes a time for people to grow, and you got to be patient with that. In meekness, instructing those that do what? Oppose themselves. In meekness, instructing those that oppose themselves, if peradventure God will give them repentance unto the acknowledging of the truth. That's what people do. They oppose themselves. They work against themselves. They work against themselves in so many situations in life. And if you're going to be involved in helping someone, helping them to grow up in God's Word, just like a parent with a child, and that analogy is used about those that are raising up people in the Word, those that have introduced them to God, that are responsible for their lives spiritually. It takes that in meekness instructing those that oppose themselves so that they can recover themselves out of the snare of the devil. You know, again, all training is the patient repetition. It's not just doing it once. This is a sharpening stone. And training, that's in the Old Testament, the word that's used is like the sharpening of a stone. It's bosnos, it's running it across the stone. So this is for sharpening knives. I've got a knife here, I've got a sharpening stone. Any of you that know anything about this stuff, right? Knife should be perfectly sharp now, right? No. This one is, because it was sharp before I ever started, and I won't keep doing it too much. But it's going over it again and again and again and again. Just patiently repeating that lesson. Patiently repeating until that lesson that you're trying to teach them is mastered. So, whatever it might be in life, whether we're talking about spiritual instruction or raising a child, you've got to be patient. You've got to be patient. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 4. We receive that instruction. Ultimately, it all has to go back to God, but others are involved. But we also have to take on the responsibility of training ourselves, of being self-disciplined. And that's what it talks about in 1 Timothy chapter 4 in verse 7. But refuse profane and old wise fables, and exercise thyself rather unto godliness. Exercise. You know, when I was in my 20s, especially in my teens and 20s, I really did a lot of exercise. And did a lot all the way through most of my adult life. As I got older, the last several years, sometimes I'm not as faithful as I once was. Bodily exercise profiteth little, it says. It profits for a little while. And boy, the older you get, that seems to get shorter and shorter. Shorter and shorter. You know, when I was in my 20s, I could go weeks, months without running every day and go back and run just as far and fast as I had. Now, it took me a lot longer to recover, but you could get away with some of that stuff. But my point with it is, and the point of the analogy is faithfulness here. Faithfulness. That profits for a little while, but he goes on to say, verse 8, profit little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come. Godliness lasts a lot longer, but it still requires faithfulness. It still requires faithfulness. And you've got to work at it. Just like when I first started, I didn't pick up a set of dumbbells or barbells one day and was able to bench 160, 170 pounds. Okay? I couldn't probably bench 50, 60 pounds when I started in my teens, okay? Young teens. But, you know, it took a while to build up. And that's what training is. It takes putting the work in. You don't just get to being those special forces spiritually. You don't get to being everything that you can be as a believer without doing the hard work that's part of it. Without spending the time to receive, to study God's Word, to really dig into it faithfully every day and work it hard, and to learn as much as you can learn. You don't get to be your best for God if you're not willing to receive reproof or correction. You don't want to ever receive it. You don't want, well, it's your privilege. That's your privilege. You know? I have tried shooting baskets with a basketball my whole life. I still can't get the thing in more times than I miss it, or even close to that. I've just never had that kind of coaching, that kind of instruction. If I really want to learn it, I'd want to put myself with somebody that could teach me, somebody that could coach me. I'd get Phil Diaz-Bear out there with me someday, tell me what I'm doing wrong. And he'd have to have a lot of patience because I don't get it too quick. You know? That's the same way with the spiritual stuff. You want to be your best, then put yourself in places and with those that can help you get there. That training that I mentioned that I went through, that's not available for everybody to do nowadays. But anybody can receive training from God. God's never limited. It's changed throughout the Word of God, throughout history, throughout modern times. Back in the Old Testament, they had the school of the prophets. Elijah and I think Samuel, others had those that were under them. With Elijah, I think there was there's mention of 100 sons of the prophets, it's called in the King James Version. But they were the school of the prophets. They were men that studied under him. Jesus Christ had his 12 disciples that he really trained hard, that he worked with, that lived with him, that spent time with him, that not only received the teaching, but were willing to receive that full instruction, saw what he did, followed his way. When you get to the epistles, the Apostle Paul had Timothy and others that learned from him and that he personally trained. And they received so much more because they wanted so much more, and their heart was to serve in such a greater way. You can go as far and fast with God as you want. And again, you get to choose. But understand that without training, you're limited in what you can do spiritually, just like you are without training limited in what you can do physically. You know, the Olympics are coming up again this summer. I won't make the team. I'm not even going to try out. I'm not even going to bother trying out. Because, yeah, I'm ridiculously old for any of the events. I don't think they've got whatever event I could still do. Casual strolling, I don't know. But I haven't trained. I never trained that big. I never cared about it. What I did care about, though, was being my best for God. I cared about training for Christian service. And I pray that I've done a halfway decent job with that. We'll find out when that Bema comes along. You know, according to the CDC, for whatever that's worth, 75% of Americans don't get the physical exercise that they need. Well, I'll tell you what, if we were talking about spiritual training, it'd be even a worse statistic.
Yeah.
Look at Acts 17. Acts 17. What is it that we're training for? We're training for Christian service, but what is that service to do? What is it all about? What's the goal? What ultimately, regardless of the activity, is the mission overall? You know, those Navy SEALs, they're not always out there hunting down Osama bin Laden or saving Captain Phillips, if you saw that movie. Yeah, Tom Hanks, and there were some pirates on a ship, and it was the Navy SEALs that went in there. They do all kinds of different missions. And when it comes to the military, there's so many different jobs. And they're all critical. Yeah, the Special Forces, they get the glory, and they get everybody, I want to be the Special Forces, I want to be the Special Forces. But it doesn't matter whether you're Special Forces or you're a pilot flying a plane or the fella putting the gas in the plane. It doesn't matter what role you do, it's all critical. Because if somebody doesn't put gas in that plane, and if they're not serious about the way they're doing it, that pilot's not going to be able to do his job, right?
Right.
There's so many different specifics of what we are involved in service. But it's all just like this book says, make your bed if you want to change the world. Whatever it is that we're doing, the goal is you've been called to change the world.
Yes.
It's that big. Look at Acts 17. And some of them believed, this is Paul and Silas, have gone into an area and taught the word there. And some of them believed and consorted with Paul and Silas. They joined them. And of the devout Greeks, a great multitude, and of the chief women, not a few. But the Jews which believed not, moved with envy, took upon them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort. You know, that's one of those phrases that is obviously kind of King James Old English phraseology, but I just like it. Certain lewd fellows of the baser sort. And they gathered a company and set all the city on an uproar and assaulted the house of Jason and sought to bring him out to the people. A whole riot breaks out here. Was this a situation that needed some men to be willing to put themselves in danger? Yeah. Was this a situation that was dangerous, was hard, was difficult, that took some real determination, some real guts, some real willingness to stand? Was this a situation that took some trust in God to get them out of it? To not become fearful?
Yes.
To not become overcome? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what Paul and Silas, the kind of men that they were. And when they found them, these certain lewd fellows of the baser sort, found Paul and Silas, They drew Jason and certain brethren unto the rulers of the city, crying that these men that have turned the world upside down are come hither also. What did these guys do? They turned the world upside down. You want to talk about changing it? They didn't just change it. They turned it upside down. This wasn't just a slight modification. And they turned the world upside down because the world's upside down to begin with. It's all kittywampus to begin with. The world is crazy. We live in an insane world. And if that's news to you, then you obviously haven't trained enough yet to be able to recognize how bad things are. It's an insane world. Every time I walk out the door, I have to remember that. I have to realize where I am. You know, it's a crazy world. Monkeys throw poop. You have to know what you're dealing with out there. If you're in combat, if you're a Navy SEAL landing on the beach, if you're a Marine walking through a jungle, you better be aware of what's around you. You better walk circumspectly. You better be aware of the danger of what you're in. And God's Word tells us to do that. But we're not out there just to buy groceries or just to go about our lives like everybody else. We're there to change the world. We're there to change the world. And we can do that. We can do that if we're willing. If we're willing to be those shining lights. If we're willing to be those examples. If we're willing to live like Christ and to not only be His ambassadors, but carry forth and share that word of reconciliation. If we do that, then we can change the world. There's not that many that are able to do that. You are the select, the few. Why? Because you know enough to know that God isn't beating people over the head. You know enough, if you've been around here for even a short time, to understand enough of God's Word rightly divided that you can actually help people. That you're not there telling them to be afraid. That you're not there teaching them all kinds of wrong stuff, wrong doctrine that will produce wrong results. Ignorance and wrong teaching are responsible for fear. It's overcome by right teaching and instruction. Instruction. We have the truth. We need to be willing to be fully trained in it and willing to train others if you want to be part of that select team that changes the world. God bless you.